cause more westerlies across the Gulf Stream deepens here in the Atlantic Basin and shears the tops of the thunderstorms off as they try to develop in the Atlantic Basin. But I know we had a lot of wind shear this year, but there were times when systems were not under that high of wind shear. They might have been under 20 knots of shear. In an otherwise season like 2005, for example, there were some of those storms that were in a sheared environment but still maintain and actually strengthen compared to this year where they did not. And so I think there's a little bit more here at play than just the El Nino situation. And let me show you why. Here is the El Nino Index going back to 1950. Now, this is a really interesting images, and I want you to pay close attention when I'm about to show you here. Let me get my notes handy on this. Let's start back in 1950. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, there wasn't satellites up there, and we might have missed some storms and blah, blah, blah. These little black circles you see on the screen are all seasons of 10 or less than 10 named storms. In other words, 9 or less named storms. And, of course, our season is included in here. I forgot to put the circle up there, but that's the very right side over here where it says 2010. Notice the little red spike there. That's the 1 degree above normal El Nino that we have out there right now. And it's getting a little bit stronger, apparently. But anyway, these are all the El Nino indexes going back to 1950. Now, notice the first time it happened was back in 1952. We had 7 named storms that year, and there was an El Nino just under 1 degree over there. The next time we had less than 10 named storms was back in 1956. This was a La Nina pattern here, folks. Look at the blue. These are more favorable, cooler sea surface temperatures in the East Pacific and more favorable overall. And 1956 we had a La Nina, and we only had 8 named storms that year. Then we go up to, again, you could argue about the satellites. 1957 was an El Nino, 1.5, stronger than what we had this year, and we had less than 10 named storms. Then the next time was 1960. We had neutral conditions, and we had 7 named storms that year. 1962 also neutral. 1963 was La Nina conditions. Notice the spike here. In 1963, we had 9 named storms that actually, let me illustrate this stuff so you can see what I'm looking at here. Then we go to the next El Nino was 1965. Now, this was the year that Betsy hit South Florida, right here. And we had a La Nina type pattern setting up there in 1965 in neutral conditions. We had 6 named storms that year. But it was La Nina as far as we knew out there in 1965. Then the next time it happened was 1967. That was also La Nina, and we only had 8 named storms back in 1967. And then we had a little spike over here in sea surface temperatures in the East Pacific, slightly above 1 degree, and that was 1968. Then we get into the 70s. 1972, we have a La Nina, and in 1972 we had less than 10 named storms. 1973, we had this peak in El Nino. 1973, it got up to about 1.8 degrees above normal, which is higher than it is this year, and we had 8 named storms back then. And this is in the satellite era, folks, so there's no excuses here, really, to say that we didn't know there were storms out there. And then we get up to 1977. Look at this dip in La Nina out here. Oh, my God. Way down here, a very strong La Nina, and yet we had less than 10 named storms in 1977. Then we have a peak here in El Nino up in here in 1979. Right in here in 1979. That was the year David threatened South Florida and hit the Georgia area. And we had less than 10 named storms in that year. And the next El Nino was 1983. Everybody remembers Hurricane Alicia, 1983. Right there, look at that El Nino, almost 3 degrees above normal. This is the strongest El Nino out of all of them, 1983. And that was a very slow hurricane season that year. I think we only had like 5 storms that year. Then we had 1986 was a pretty much a neutral beginning a strong El Nino in 1987 here, and we had a very slow season that year as well. So that was a strong El Nino, 2 degrees above normal. The next El Nino was 1992. This was Hurricane Andrew's El Nino, And then 1993, it got even stronger. These were all years of below 10 named storms. 1993, 1994, 1997, all El Niños in here. Then we had a little La Nina peak in here where we had an active season. Then back in, this is back in 1997, we had another El Nino, a strong El Nino here, and we had a very slow hurricane season that year as well. And then, of course, here we are at the end of the scale, the 1 degree above normal on average, about 1.5 actually out here in the 2009 hurricane season. But look at 2005 now. There was a little bit of a El Nino out here, not real strong, but it was not exactly like neutral conditions in 2005 either. It was slightly above. It was about 0.5 degree to 0.75 degree above normal in the East Pacific in the year that we had all those named storms in 2005. So basically what this boils down to, the whole chart here that I'm showing you, is that in El Nino seasons, we've had 14 El Nino seasons since 1950. That's 63% of the seasons had 10 or less than 10 named storms in El Nino seasons, and La Nina seasons represent 36%, and those had slow, below 10 named storms. 36% of the La Nina seasons had eight seasons were La Ninas where we had 10 or less named storms. So there are some La Nina years and neutral years where we had slow hurricane seasons. That was the point of this whole graphic. So I thought you might find that very interesting. This is, by the way, from the University of Colorado at Boulder, the Physical Science Division. You might want to check this out. It's a very interesting graphic. I just added the black circles to show you years of less than 10 named storms. All right, this is the El Nino forecast from the ENSO forecast, and these are all the models shown here, and this is from March of 2009, and this is a very interesting photograph because, not a photograph, an actual graphic here. This is the March forecast from 2009, and showing what it would be in October, November, December, showing the El Nino would be about 1.5 degrees above